So last week, I called Don Faul, CEO of CrossFit, a great leader. You guys yelled at me for it. Let's get into it. Usual video for many of you because the nature of YouTube is often to discuss ways people have failed us. And I could easily come in and make that video. I could make 5 ways Don Faul has screwed the pooch within CrossFit. But what I'd rather do is something more constructive and discuss the areas he's consistently discussed with us since coming on board. I think if Don wants to lead this company to new heights, he's going to need to follow some models outside of CrossFit laid by CEOs who have taken over struggling or failing companies. We also need to remember Don's got a couple of huge issues behind him that he's having to deal with. The first one is he took over after a disastrous tenure of Eric Rosa. And before you guys come at me for that, I know I was one of the ones who originally thought Eric was going to be fantastic. And by all accounts, his resume indicated that he would be. When you really look back on it or had to summarize what happened with his tenure, the downfall really comes to lack of transparency. The early reports indicated that he was going to have far more ownership power than he actually had, and he honestly spent more time in the role trying to prove his fitness or hanging out with athletes or the buttery bros than actually solving the problems of the business ahead of him. And that really has hamstrung Don in the early days of his tenure. He also has the unenviable task of following an inspirational and a beloved leader like Greg. That is always difficult to do. And so he's got this tightrope that he has to navigate in order for success. Now, it's not unheard of to overcome those things. And while CrossFit is certainly a very unique business, it's still a business at the end of the day. And so there are definitely some levers he can pull to get us to where we want to go. So does anybody remember when Marvel Entertainment was in the dumpster? If you're a nerd like me, you absolutely remember because there was a time when they didn't dominate the superhero box office the way they do now. In the early 2000s, Marvel brought in a CEO that understood that the greatest asset that they had was their existing library and their intellectual property. And so what he was able to do was leverage that at very little expense to the company, and he avoided what would be considered a huge risk to the business by not having to create new content. So there was no risk of creating something new and people disliking it. They knew they had great content. All they needed to do was leverage it. CrossFit is really no different in that regard. We have decades of content available to us that we could fall back on. And this is an area where I don't think Don and his team have really leveraged it to the extent that they could. They need to start by bringing back the CrossFit Journal as the main source of information to the community. I'd have every press release, every news article, every rule book, any discussion point, any piece of information that the community needed access to would go through that. I'd make sure that Morning Chalk Up and Barbell Spin never got another piece of breaking news from anywhere other than the CrossFit Journal. You could tie all this together with an app that allows community engagement, much like Street Parking and Hard Work Payoff both do this really well. It'd just be a huge win, both for affiliate owners. It'd be a huge win for HQ, and I think it'd be a win for the community at large as we get to engage with each other and get back to that same vibe we had in the early 2010s when we'd all go to the journal and post our times. I think the other thing that they could do is be humble enough to realize that they don't have all the answers and follow the lead of some other businesses that are doing things really well within the community that we could easily do. As an example, Rogue Fitness always has their Legends comp at the Rogue Invitational. There's nothing keeping us from leveraging the OGs in the community of the Fronings and Baileys and Kalipas and get them together either at competitions or think about content they could put out with these guys. You remember the comps they used to do, like the lift off at Big Sky? People still talk about that to this day. And I think that's a real easy and non-controversial way to get cameras out in front of beloved athletes and get the community really engaged in what they're doing. I think the second area that Don is addressing, but arguably not aggressively enough, in my opinion, is culture and trust. And I would lead with Don's fighting with a couple of ghosts of the past here. The first one is there's still a real lack of trust within the community, and I would suspect within HQ itself because of Eric's lack of transparency and a culture problem that came along with that. Ultimately, Eric's biggest downfall initially when they took over this company was he failed to recognize you don't keep entrenched leadership in a takeover where you fundamentally plan to change the business. And so now Don has to deal with that. Don's been really transparent from the very beginning that there would be turnover and that turnover would continue to happen. He actually discussed it on my show back in February that this was a natural course of business that would continue to happen. I do think, however, that the turnover that they're talking about that's coming requires a much more hands-on approach by the CEO. And again, I'm speculating here. I can't say this for fact, but I know when I talked to Don about how they manage the business, most, if not all, of the employees are remote. And remote employees are very difficult to manage from a culture standpoint. And so I think Don needs to find more face-to-face touch points with this team and take a really strict approach as to who's buying into the culture and who isn't. I do think he's had some really early wins around culture and hiring. You can look at Jenna Halka and Jada Coons as two examples of people that have come from the outside and seem to be drinking the CrossFit Fit Aid, so to speak, and really buying into the culture. Now that's, based off of me looking at their social profiles and workouts that they're posting, but that's a really good indication that they love what they're doing and they love our community. And I think that's a good indication that Don's on the right track from a hiring perspective, but he has to root out the people that don't buy into this culture change and do it quick, or they're going to be doomed to fail. And I think the last thing that he's got to recognize and look at, and Don calls this his North Star, but I would call it core product. I think of companies that don't have success usually happens because they focus on something other than their core product. And when that happens, they start to fail and they fail fast. I can point to a few companies where they brought in new CEOs and refocused the company on core products and turned it around. And so it's certainly something that can happen here within CrossFit. You could look at, as an example, two companies, Apple and Starbucks are good examples of well-respected, highly successful companies where they've had to come in, refocus on a core product, and turn the company around and taken it to new heights. In CrossFit's case, we cannot lose our core product, or the North Star, as Don calls it, which is basically affiliate growth and supporting affiliate owners. I get the sense from the investments that they're making that this is going to continue to be a big push. And I will give them higher grades on this, Mark, because you see the investments as in areas like the affiliate toolkit, the affiliate map, as well as working on improving SEO, that they seem to be putting their eggs into this basket that affiliate growth is the main priority of the business. I heard Don on a podcast recently mention that they were looking at some of the participatory side of the sport to see if there's potential for our business as well. And I would caution them that's a dangerous road to go down. Now, if it's done right and you do it in a community format, it's possible there could be a real opportunity to grow the business and leverage affiliates, affiliate owners, and affiliate members. And a good example of that's the Service Cup that they just did. By all accounts, it seemed to be a pretty decent success, although I'm not sure I saw as many affiliates jumping into it as maybe they could have. But I think that's an example of an area where you could bring some people together, do traditional CrossFit, and it's a community engagement piece, and there's potential for them. I think if they try to go head-to-head with High Rocks, it's going to be bad news for them. And again, it will take them off their North Star. My fear is, as you start looking at participatory side, you find yourself creating a monster no different than the games. And while the games are fun and exciting to watch, it's been a financial hamstring on the company for some time. And I'd hate to see them, start chasing those dollars at the expense of our North Star, which is affiliate growth and affiliate owners. When it's all said and done, I call Don a great leader for really 3 reasons. I give him high marks on vision, transparency, and ownership. Is he perfect? Nope. I certainly am going to continue to challenge him. I'm going to continue to critique his leadership where I see it. But I also think we can all recognize that he has had tremendous hurdles to overcome in this job, and the task ahead of him is even harder. But I think we can all have the confidence based on what he's done so far that he's the right man for the job.